When it comes to comic adaptations, The Boys is probably the best at taking its source material, changing it, and actually making it better. So let's take a look at all the changes. Oh, this was already done before. Well, season 3 just finished, so I guess it makes sense to revisit this, especially since that thing happened. Oh, and spoilers just in case you're not caught up yet. Ever since the end of season 1's reveal of Ryan, it was obvious that The Boys was going to take a pretty drastic shift from the source material, and season 3 really turned that up a notch. And there's really no better example of that than with Soldier Boy. In the comics, the Soldier Boy that we spend the most time with is cowardly, really gullible, and way more of a suck-up than anything else. The title of Soldier Boy is also more of a mantle that's passed down, as there have been 3 guys with the name, and considering that he is an obvious parody of Captain America, that makes sense. Now in the show, they went with a combination of his initial version and his most recent, with a heavy focus on the original old-timey version. We don't know much about the original except that he fought in World War II, botched a mission leading to his whole team being massacred, and led the Avenging Squad because Garth Ennis is anything but subtle. The Amazon version takes this and combines him with the newer, worse version by giving him a connection to Payback, and that's actually kinda it. But they did give him soup nullifying explosion powers, so that's something new. Luckily, because they went with the older, less annoying version, we don't have to talk about him during Herogasm. Oh look, it's Herogasm. So, because, like Soups, I am also subject to corporate interests, this one is going to be a little more difficult to explain. The event of Herogasm is largely the same, although in the comics, the Soups and even villains lie that there's a threat out in space that they need to go fight while they go on and, you know, do the thing. But the events that came out of the limited run are very different. In the comics, there's of course a much bigger focus on the event than the show did, but aside from that, we find out about Vaught's plan to install Victor Veep as president, and more backstory to just flesh out more of the corporate dealings of the US government, as well as Black Noir assaulting Huey. And then there's the whole Soldier Boy situation. This is where we find out that Homelander, taking advantage of Soldier Boy's desire to be a part of the Seven, has him do certain favors for him in the hopes that he joins the team. He never joins the team. So always remember, anytime that you think that Homelander in the show is bad, the comics are much, much worse. Alright, now let's look at the band of misfits known as the Boys and how they were changed during their transition to the small screen. So let's start with Huey. For starters, he isn't American in the comics. Instead, he's Scottish and was modeled after his dad in the show, Simon Pegg, who isn't Scottish, so that's weird, but whatever. Aside from all the major aesthetic differences that you can see here, there are a few more changes, like him not really even knowing about soup since he was in the UK for most of his life, the powers he got when Butcher forcibly gives him pure Compound V that don't include him teleporting with no clothes on, and him actually being adopted with both of his adoptive parents still together in the comics. The last thing that shows how far the show has strayed from the comics is that he actually got revenge on A-Train for running through Robin in the comics. But even after punching him in the middle of Herogasm, we probably won't be seeing him punt his head square off his body anytime soon. Then we have Kimiko, who doesn't even have a name in the comics, so another positive change. But the only thing that's really different between her and her comic counterpart, aside from, having depth, is her backstory. In the comics, Kimiko got her powers from falling into a vat of Compound V waste and ends up becoming bloodlusted with a little superhuman strength to boot. She was kept by Vought and experimented on until Butcher and the Boys rescued her, which is where her and the show kinda sync up. In season 2, we find out that Kimiko was actually used as a child soldier who was then taken prisoner in the US by Vought to be experimented on. Between her and Frenchie, who is almost the exact same character, except he also finally has a name and doesn't have powers, it'll be interesting to see if they share the same fate they did in the comics or not. Now, I love MM in the show. Just like Huey, he's always wearing cool music shirts, has an interesting backstory in the show, and just seems like a cool dude. In the comics, he's very similar, aside from one major thing. In the show, MM's name is Marvin T. Milk, so going from that to MM and even Mother's Milk as a sort of play on how he's the heart of the group makes sense. Cool. A little weird, but there's weirder things in the comics. Like how in the comics, MM's name is Baron Wallace, but he gets the nickname of Mother's Milk because he was born with powers after his mother, who worked in a Vought factory, was exposed to Compound V and passed it on to him. Now, to survive, he has to drink, hence the name, Mother's Milk. Personally, I'm glad that this little tidbit hasn't been brought up yet, but who knows, it could somehow get worse in the show. Oh, and by the way, Butcher's like the same dude. I mean, he's worse in the comic, but a lot of things are worse in the comic. And just like with the boys, the 7 also have a lot of differences between them, and not just the team comp being different. Some characters are completely different, and because it requires talking about the ending of the comics, here's another comic-related spoiler alert, just in case. So, Black Noir is a completely different character in the show, RIP. In the comics, Black Noir was actually a clone of Homelander and was Vaught's ace in case he went rogue. Or more rogue than usual, I guess. Black Noir is also actually the one that did most of the evil things that Homelander was framed for as a plot to psychologically break him, because Black Noir himself actually went insane waiting for the go-ahead to just get rid of Homelander altogether. Obviously, that's not the story that the Amazon show is going for, which does mean that wherever this crazy story is going, it's going to be, again, much different than the source material. I would have loved to see more of the animated critters, but I should have known that nothing good lasts long in the boys. Now on to the speedster. No, not him. A-Train. In the show, he's gone through a few arcs to humanize him more, especially in season 3, but in the comics, he's much more of a and that's saying something. Instead of the deep assaulting Starlight like in the show, it's the trio of Homelander, Black Noir, and A-Train continues to harass her after the fact. The relationship between A-Train and Popclaw was also something created just for this series. They don't even meet in the comics as far as we know. And we already talked about how A-Train finally got taken out in the comics, and while I don't think Huey would end up being the one to actually take him out unless it's an accident, with Homelander having a new number 2, it might be time for him to find some new employment. For the team captain, Homelander, he really isn't that much different. Sure, he's more aggressive, but again, and say it with me if you know the words, everything is more aggressive in the comics. The only real differences are that he's actually responsible for Becca's assault instead of Black Noir, he was made from Stormfront's DNA in the comics instead of Soldier Boy's, and he doesn't have that weird fascination with milk in the comics. Now, because of how season 3 worked, Homelander's public persona has taken a turn for the worst that never really happened in the comics. To the public, he was obviously a good guy. To his sycophants, he still is, but it's more obvious to everyone else that Homelander might not be the perfect bastion of goodness that he's been pretending to be so far. We'll get into Ryan near the end of the video, but because of him being a significant part of seasons 2, 3, it'll be interesting just how different Homelander is going to be now that Ryan is going to be with him full time. For the second in command, Queen Maeve, but until Starlight in the show, but we'll get to that later, season 3 really shook up her character. In the comics, she's killed during a fight with Homelander while trying to protect Starlight. Now in the show, because of her losing her powers and hopefully getting out of the superhero business for good, this might be the last that we see of her. Aside from that change, that could still happen because there's no such thing as happy endings in the boys, they're very similar. Her character was expanded to include being bisexual, but that never impacted the story, and she's still the same cynic in both versions. Since we didn't get too much time with just her, we don't know if some of her comic relationships were the same in the show, like with the Legend for example, but again, at that point we're just nitpicking to find changes. Now, for the Resident Green Lantern parody, we get a much more softened up version. So Lamplighter in the comics is still responsible for killing Mallory's family, but the show makes sure to let you know that he didn't mean it, and that the hit was made on her and not the kids. He's also not working in a medical research facility for Soups in the comics either. He actually gets turned into a zombie after Mallory gets his revenge, but then after that, nothing really happens to him, he's just kinda there. Before season 3, I thought they might go that route with him, but after no mention, that probably won't happen. It would also probably take away some of the tension if you could just bring people back, even if they can't do much. If you read the comics before the show, you were probably wondering what happened to Jack from Jupiter. He's only been mentioned once so far in Lamplighter's personal collection of positively percolating motion pictures, but since no one cares or likes him in the comics, I guess it makes sense that to carry that tradition of making sure Jack is unimportant, he was replaced by Translucent. In the comics, Butcher gets revenge on Jack after it's presumed that he killed Terror, so instead of that, we got a new Soup in Translucent, and you all saw what happened with him. Since the 7 is down 4 members now, maybe they'll bring in Jack, or that whole team gets thrown out because there's no point anymore. Season 4 is looking like it might shake things up even more than 3 did. Now, when writing this, I did actually forget about the Deep because he sucks and is annoying, and I try to forget about him, but his comic counterpart is probably the most different without just straight up being a new character. In the show, the Deep is much closer to an Aquaman parody, while in the comics, he's more like Black Manta since he's really just a guy in a suit. The two also have very different personalities, with comic Deep being more serious, or I guess you could say mature, while the show's version is like a little kid that just wants to be loved. The show's actually done a great job in humanizing him and making him more than just a bad guy who talks to fish. The comic Deep doesn't even have water or fish powers, which is whack, but somehow after everything, he's still alive in the comics, so I guess he gets points for that. And even in a video like this, I feel like I'm compelled to talk about Starlight, even though aside from her just sticking up for herself earlier than she does in the comics, she's really the exact same character. So let's move on. Okay, now that we're done with the major teams, let's move into the standalones. In the comics, Stormfront was the first soup made during World War II by the Germans, but grew up in America. He's finally defeated after a fight between him and the boys backed up by Love Sausage after they wail on him for a bit. Obviously, the show went a different route, with Stormfront being a woman who actually grew up in Germany during the dark times. She's also the first soup, but takes on a different persona when in America as Liberty, who then comes back as Stormfront, and you all know how that turned out. Unofficially, Stormfront was also the leader of Payback since he was much stronger than Soldier Boy, but in the show, since the female Stormfront doesn't have any connections to the team, aside from starting Herogasm with Soldier Boy under the Liberty name, that was dropped. But for the most part, she's just the rebranded millennial version of the German villain from the 40s. If you didn't read the comics, you probably thought that Stan Edgar would have been a major part considering how he was in Season 2 and about half of Season 3. But you'd be wrong. In the comics, we don't even see Mr. Edgar, and when he dies of a supposed heart attack, James Stillwell has Jessica Bradley, who's the comic version of Ashley, installed as the new CEO in a similar way to what happened in Season 3. Everything that we've seen so far is more of an analog to James Stillwell than even Madeline Stillwell was. Of course, we still have to see if Edgar is going to be operating from the shadows like James was, but let's just get into Madeline since it's not like Stan was important in the comics to begin with. Okay, so like I said, Stan Edgar is more of a James Stillwell than Madeline was, but since they share the same last name, let's compare James with Madeline. In the comics, James is the most cold, calculating businessman you can imagine. Even in the face of Homelander, he just doesn't care. Every time Edgar in the show would call the soup's bad product, that's from James. Now in the show, Madeline takes on a weird surrogate mother angle with Homelander instead. She's still capable and uses that relationship as shrewdly as James would, but there's more of a loving pity to her relationship rather than the outright hate and contempt that James has. He's also responsible for the G-Men massacre, who we should get more info on during their spinoff. He actually makes it out of the main story of the boys and pops up during the Dear Becky epilogue, but it's more fun to see what happens to him yourself rather than a dude explaining it to you. I know that's like my whole thing, but trust me, it's actually funny. And now for my second favorite new-ish character, Victoria Newman. The end of Season 3 is when we finally see some version of Vic the Veep come to fruition. So in the comics, Vic the Veep is the personification of being dumb as a bag of rocks. Everything he says is like a mental flashbang and makes you feel really bad about the state of American politics. In the show, you still feel bad, but at least Victoria can speak full sentences. As a Vought plant in the government, that's where all the similarities end. Her connection to Stan Edgar is new, her having powers obviously is new, and being able to actually go against Vaught's plans. Vic the Veep ends up being sworn in after the current president was mauled by a Wolverine, but Homelander takes him out pretty quickly after that. Now, with Victoria on her way to the White House and actually having a problem with Vought now after feeling betrayed by Stan Edgar, it seems like, at least on the government side, the boys might still have an ace on their side. Maybe. Okay, finally, before we get into the lightning round, let's talk about Homelander's kid. In the comics, it was Black Noir's and didn't last too long after being born, since it took out Becca and Butcher did what Butcher usually does. Everything we see in the show is completely new, and I am interested in seeing where he goes from here. I personally thought he was a little too soft for my liking, but him being cool with his dad lasering a dude's head off is concerning for him going forward, but considering how well written most of the changes have been so far, I doubt they go and make him an annoying little brat. But I could be wrong, and we could grow to hate him more than Homelander. Who knows? Okay, here's some quick ones. The legend in the show is more of a Kevin Feige analog than Stan Lee like in the comics. Ashley, like I said, is based off of Jessica Bradley, who took over after Stan kicked the bucket. Little Nina is actually little, made an experimental version of Compound V that could cause Soup's head to explode with a certain frequency and exploded from a bomb placed in her favorite toy. Becca Butcher didn't survive her child's birth. Flight 37 ended up in the Brooklyn Bridge instead of the middle of the ocean. Silver Kincaid was a part of the G-Men, but we honestly don't know if they're gonna do that in the show. MM's wife is actually nice in the show, and Rainer survives until the end of the series in the comics. And if I missed anything, I'm sure you'll let me know. There's always a lot of talk about how important being close to the source material is when it comes to stuff like this. And I'm always on the side of, if it's a cool difference, I don't care. And so far, the Amazon version has become the actual critique of superheroes, corporate interests, and government overreach that the original never really hit, since it was more concerned with being edgy and aggressive. Hopefully, it continues to evolve these characters, because so far, it's been a pretty wild ride.